What I'm interested in is how do we craft human beings in service to life? How do we craft young men who are fully alive, whose contribution is less measured than qualified, who have an eye for awe, mystery, and beauty, and an awareness and a softness and a strength that is engaging and enlivening? So that's where I'm coming from a lot with this. And that's the kind of wondering that I'm engaged with you here now.
Hello and welcome to What is the Rite of Passage? I'm your host, Damien Smith, and this week's guest, coming all the way from Sweden, is Miki Dedijer. Miki brings a unique and beautiful approach to this work, coaching and facilitating fathers and families through a year-long Rite of Passage. We acknowledge the Jara people, the traditional custodians of the land where this is being recorded. We acknowledge elders and knowledge holders, past, present and emerging. May the ceremonies and initiations be remembered, and may this feed and heal the country on which we live, work and play. Welcome, Miki.
Thank you, Dame.
I'm going to bust myself right out of the gate. We were half an hour into this conversation and it was amazing before I realised I didn't press record. And so we are launching into it again. What I noticed from the previous call was a beautiful check-in from you, and I was wondering if you could do that again for me, please, for us.
It's delightful to be in conversation about what you and I both lend a part of our lives to. So I'm really glad for the conversation we had and for the vitality that it stoked, and for a chance to share it in a recorded way with people who are listening. And so every morning I have my coffee in the garden, and there is a pied flycatcher, a couple who live under my eaves and catch all the flies that used to be indoors, but now they catch them before they get indoors. And it just lifts my heart to be in conversation with those birds. I talk to them every morning. I have this childhood dream of being like Saint Francis and having all the birds land on me. But that's reserved for the saints, it seems. They haven't landed on me, but it's lovely to be with them. And yeah, so having a garden, being with nature, makes me full of joy, and it's a wonderful way to start the day. So that's what I'm with.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm with the word affirmed. And so I'm feeling affirmed in the presence of this conversation and yourself. I'm feeling in this shared experience, in this shared passion, that I exist. I feel like I exist here on this planet, and and this conversation is affirming that, and that's such a beautiful feeling for me. And I think it's relevant in this conversation, in that my intention in Rites of Passage is to try and be curious and discover how much I can see in a teenage boy, and then suddenly I'm wondering how much I can see in myself and how much I can be reflected in with others. And yeah, so feeling affirmed. Yeah, thank you. Miki, what do you do for fun, and how does that bring you to yourself?
I don't think of it as fun, but maybe that's neither here nor there. But I love kayaking. I live right by the ocean. And for Midsummer Now, I was out kayaking in a thunderstorm. Well, I woke up to a thunderstorm. And, you never know what will happen or what you'll encounter. And being in the thunderstorm is, frightening and fascinating. So I think most of what I do, the gardening, the kayaking, those are all ways to put myself in places where I'm moderately in control. And that gives me immense pleasure to know that I'm not the center of the universe, that I could be struck by lightning, I can freeze, that I am not comfortable always. That being out of the four walls of the house gives me immense pleasure and joy. Sharing that with my two sons who are 16 and 18. I was out fishing with my oldest son yesterday, um, chatting, sitting, talking, seeing if we catch anything. Uh, that gives me immense pleasure as well. Play harmonica and the djembe enthusiastically but poorly in a small eclectic band here, which I really enjoy, mostly for the social, for the, hanging out and their kids and there's a dog and, just the messiness of being in a household that's not mine, doing something together that's not Netflix. Um,
Yeah.
that also is something I really enjoy.
Mm. As you describe some of that, I'm dreaming into the geography, and I have a sense of Sweden. I've been there when I was in my early 20s, and as you talking about fishing and kayaking, um, yeah, I wonder if you could paint me a little bit more of a picture of your landscape seasonally. It's kind of midsummer there now. Yeah, just for yeah, where are we? We're in midwinter in Australia, very short days. Yeah, paint us a picture. Tell us about your home.
So this house is from the 1700s that I live in, and it's locally known as, still has the name of the captain whose family lived here in the 1700s. When they refer to the house, they refer to the captain from back then. So the sea is right behind the hill from me. Uh, yeah, I live on the west coast of Sweden, north of Gothenburg, right between what used to be called in the Iron Age the land of the elves and the kingdom of the Ocean Queen, Älvsyssel och Ranrike. We've lost a lot of the stories from that time, but it's still, very hard not to imagine ancestry when out among the islets, mostly red granite around here. And then the sea is open to the English Isles on the west, and there's been a lot of exchanges, you know, between the two countries. So sailing has been for ages the main way of traveling and transport here, and my boys are both raised with a understanding and skill of being with the water, being with the sea. So they sail and they know some of the stories, and so we've always tried to bring this landscape into their lives. And this time of year, as you mentioned, just after midsummer, you sent me a message, which I imagine was your afternoon, but it was 11 o'clock in the evening here. Nights are very short, if they exist at all now. And so
Mm.
it's a time full of energy and activity and work and excitement. And we forget about winter often this time of year, because winter is polar opposite, as it is for many of us, of course.
Mm. God, you left a little hook in there that I'm going to latch my lips into, and it's around the ancestral tales of Scandinavia, yeah, England, and certainly in this conversation of initiation, yeah, I think there's a lot of tales that come from North America, and certainly Australian Aborigines have a very strong history in initiation. What what or how do some of those ancestral tales and lore from your land inform rites of passage for you and initiation for you?
So initiation can be thought as reenactment if we're not careful. You know that
Okay.
uh, that we try to look good, try to look like we're doing the right thing. We're doing what they did.
Got it.
Um, it sounds and smells and looks a certain way, and then that we know that's initiation. That being said, I anyone who comes across my work, who spends enough time um, uh, digging into some of the things I share, uh, will come across my one of my favorite quotes, which is from a Japanese poet uh, who got it from someone else about 2,000 years ago. But basically, don't do what your ancestors did; seek what they saw. And so when when I've looked at our records here, that's what I've been looking at. What is it they were trying to achieve with initiation? Why did they reckon it was important? What made it, because any culture that lives off the land is a incredibly pragmatic culture. They're not going to a spiritual workshop to dress up in white and eat only vegan food. They they're doing it for the survival of the culture.
Yeah.
And so what is it that really is not just for the boy, but for the survival of the culture and the environment that we depend on? Um, and so then there are all kinds of aspects of what such an initiation should entail then. So here, there are records, and they're tattered, uh, that boys were taken into caves. Um, and we have the mythology of the dragon here. And that was a place to encounter uh, what the dragon um, uh, what the dragon meant to that culture. And to us, that might be death. That might be stasis. That might be the limits of something, the darkness, the descent that are so essential to a boy coming of age, to come face to face with um, everything he fears, really. And so there are places around here that I found that bear the name, which have become inured to their older meaning, but they would suggest that those places were caves used for initiation, possibly.
Mm.
Um, but then there's also all these other things like old songs and, of course, fairy tales that we have, to a certain extent, lost the capacity and the skill of listening to, of hearing the very hard-earned wisdom that they hold. And so all of this, you could say, are embers that if we blow on them long enough, they might reignite. And so it's a way of orienting to that. Can we understand what they sought? Can we spot some fragments of what remains from their way of approaching it? Can we make them relevant to our lives now, and blow over them long enough for them to reignite and warm us again?
Mm. It reminds me of of a line in one of Martin Prechtel's books where, I mean, he's got so many amazing stories, but he was a horseman, and breaking indigenous horses, or domesticating indigenous horses for work and whatnot. And so he sort of used this living analogy of the way to, if he couldn't go out and get a herd of indigenous horses, he would take his most indigenous horses and set them free. They would run to the indigenous herd, and then he could bring them all back. And so I think in that cobbling together story, it really struck me with this analogy. It's just like, well, I might not be in touch with my indigenous nature, but if I can sit with some intact indigenous nature, maybe it will bring my own to life.
Yeah, and if you use the term soul awakening, say, as one aspect of what an initiation, um, one role that initiation serves, one function it has, then spending enough time on your own in nature uh, is one way to stir that memory again, that indigeneity. There's still enough places in nature that we can find that are wild. A friend of mine yesterday, he lives in England, which struggles to boast a lot of wild areas, and I hope people don't mind me saying that, but I certainly, compared to Sweden, it's hugely populated. And for him, it's the sea. That's where he goes. He goes into the ocean and spearfishes. And,
Yeah.
he, as he expresses it, a wave could break his neck. And
Mm.
he is highly adrenalated. He is aware, awake, afraid. And take a boy into an environment like that, and the capacity for nature to birth the young man is still right there. So a lot of these, we can approach it intellectually and say, God, we lost so much. And of course we have. We're immensely impoverished culturally. And yet we have fairy tales and myths. We have wild nature. If we don't have it, we because it's not ours to have, but we can access it. We can go there. And so a lot of the possibilities for that indigeneity is with us. It requires a certain amount of, like your introduction that really sets the ground for this conversation by remembering the land and praying that this conversation serves the aliveness of the land. To constantly remember our relationships that can birth that indigeneity, that cultured creativity of being a human being. Yeah. So we're poor, but there's a lot, if we have the eyes to see it, that can support us.
Yeah, thank you. I have another question. I just want to let that really deep acknowledgement of nature settle. Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate where we are as well. We're not where I expected we'd be. And it's amazing. Um, something So, my understanding is that you've been involved in Mankind Project?
Yes.
Yeah, and I imagine in Europe, as much as here, the Iron John story is used centrally in Mankind Project?
Yes.
Yeah. My understanding also is that that's an adaptation, a Robert Bly's adaptation from the from a Grimm fairy tale, yeah, which is stemmed somewhere around where you are.
Yeah. So, you know, Sweden being a Germanic country, a
Mm,
lot of these stories, like all stories do, they travel. And
mm,
in Sweden, it's called Järnhans. Uh, so that story, it's hard to tell where it came from, really. But I believe it's a Germanic story, and we have
mm,
versions of it here as well.
mm. Yeah, beautiful. I've been in discussion with some Mankind Project people in Australia around how appropriate that story is for the teenagers, and it seems like it is because it's a story of this transition and this crossing of these thresholds from a boy into manhood, into wildhood, into mehood. Um, yeah, and also I've heard that it's just so appropriate for men's initiation because it carries the boy that we carry in ourselves, and it carries the gift that we put down and were searching and searching and searching for, only to realize that we had it all along.
You know, just on the topic of that, so there are a couple of things. Martin Shaw, the British mythologist, he's writing a prologue to a new reissue of Iron John that's coming out. So it's about to become, I imagine a renewed interest in that story. Also, Robert Bly, when he told that story, when he brought it in the 80s, uh, there were certain aspects of the story that spoke to the men at that time, and that Robert Bly um, focused on. But the beauty of these stories is, uh, they're endlessly rich. We can turn to them again and again and again and discover new things and learn from them in different ways. So when we hear a story, uh, if we approach it as a as you said about the teenagers, you're always trying to see not what am I, you didn't say what am I missing, but how can I know? You're with great curiosity because you're approaching a living being that's continuously a mystery. We can
Mm,
approach stories the same way, not to nail it, not to know exactly what it means, but to have that curiosity about it. And so the way we understood Iron John and the way Robert Bly presented it in the 80s might be very different today. Now, there's a Canadian mythologist who has trained with Martine Prechtel, but she's also a naturalist and a wonderful storyteller. And she has a different understanding of the Iron John tale. So in the Mankind, partly due to the history of the Mankind Project and how it arose with Robert Bly, and also the context of Mankind, that story is very much related to the man, the boy. Stephanie Mackay, when she relates it, uh, is that it's about our relationship to nature, our relationship to iron, that we have forgotten the reciprocity with the holy in nature. We become greedy. We take, 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 take. And Iron John begins to exact a price for that lack of reciprocity, lack of relationship, and lack of respect. So it's still an initiatory tale, but what it tells is not about the psychological development of the boy into a man, but rather what is the right relationship to nature as you become a young man. And it could be seen as a tale of warning as well.
mm,
Do not take it for granted. You're not a child anymore. You can't just expect to get, get, get. You have a responsibility now to reciprocate, to give, to tend and care for.
mm. Wow, and here we are, I think, back at this juncture of the teenage boy with his head in the fridge and his stinky socks on the floor and his demands and his slouching
There you go. Yeah.
and his hood.
So,
Yeah.
so just to say, we're in the zone now, and what wasn't recorded that was that we had a long conversation about the signs and all
Yeah.
of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think I am going to request that you reenact or readdress if you possibly would, because I think it's so important.
Yeah. So you want to ask the question again? So
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I'm going to ask the question again. And the question is, how does a mother know when a teenage boy is ready for initiation or a rite of passage?
right. Um, so not being a mother myself, uh, it's partly hearsay, my response, and it's partly the mothers I know with sons, and it's partly having been a boy myself with a mother. But and having two sons with a mother as well, and knowing a little bit what they're with. Um, and then there's, whether it's a single mom or a mother in a family, in a nuclear family, so to speak. But there are the obvious physical signs that we're all familiar with. You spoke of it as a natural repulsion.
Mm.
Everything that uh, has transformed this little cute, the baby. Nobody can stop sniffing a baby. They smell so good, and the boy, the boy is like has a neutral kind of scent, and then suddenly you hit teenage years, and it's off the charts. Something is rotting. Something is
Yeah.
not right. You walk into the room and it's like walking off the plane in Nicaragua or something. You're just in a different atmosphere. You know, it's it's pungent and it's fetid and it's damp. Um,
Yeah.
and so physical signs, then there are the obvious ones of the, refusing to clean the room, and personal hygiene might not be the best. But what we spoke about before and what's also so important are these signs that are almost mythological, that we might miss or pathologize as a psychological problem. Uh, eh, we might call it anxiety. Older
Mm.
cultures might have recognized it as an encounter with uh, ghosts. Uh, Fear of the dark was one sign in some cultures. The boy suddenly is afraid, and that fear was a sign that he was now beginning to imagine that life can end. Most children, most boys don't do that. Most boys don't come face to face with death. But when you become an adolescent, you recognize that, gosh, I'm changing really, really fast. I can barely walk. I bump into things. And as I'm changing, something is ending. I'm not a little boy anymore. And if that's possible, what else is possible? Well, life can end. And there's risk taking. There's a tremendous amount of risk taking as a boy. My son jumped off an 11-meter cliff the other day. Uh, you know, and you're like, oh, why do you do that? And then you remember, of course, well, I did that at that age. But there's a flirtation with death.
Yeah.
If we pathologize that uh, and take it to a psychologist who likely is not initiated and also is afraid of death, we'll want to control that. Uh, if we see it as a sign, we'll take it upon ourselves the responsibility to introduce our son to men who uh, have a certain amount of depth and familiarity with shadow, with darkness, with descent, and with death. And it can begin to help our son build a relationship with death. You mentioned Martin Prechtel. Martin Prechtel speaks of the initiatory process among the Tutu Hill people as wrestling death. You know, it's not to vanquish it, not to win over it, not to supersede it in some sort of transhumanist way, but to wrestle it, which in another way of saying that is to become familiar with it. And so if we do pathologize it, we rationalize and uh, become so afraid that we can craft illness from the pathologizing it. But if we mythologize it, those signs, then we can familiarize ourselves with that as an aspect of being an adult and a responsibility to life. So there are behavioral signs, there are physical signs, emotional signs, but I'd say to look for the signs in the boy that suggests that something is struggling to be remembered and awoken. Uh, and the other one, of course, as a mother, is the reluctance to notice the reluctance of letting our boy become a young man. The resistance, all the resistance uh, that can show up as smothering or control or fear or even neediness. You know, I want my little boy, which are also equally natural and understandable. Uh, in these older cultures and these days as well, if we learn to see it not as a pathology but as a development or growth, um, uh, that's the time for people to come to the door and take the boy. And because most of us don't live in a place where that'll happen, it can be a time to reach out and say, look, I'm noticing these signs. I recognize what they're saying. I'm incapable of supporting him in that transformation. Will you help?
Thank you. Something that struck me with this conversation earlier was the role that sexuality plays between the boy and the mother at this point, which I find really, really curious. And certainly for me, ties in with that repulsion and tension and the need for separation.
Yeah, yeah, it's a radical transformation. Suddenly, you have a you know a budding stallion in your household, hormonally absolutely immersed in testosterone, um, and it's hard to imagine and difficult to remember at my age what that was like. But I see it in my boys, and so for a mother who herself has never experienced that as a boy, it's immensely hard to understand what's going on. And because it's hard to understand what's going on, and because the boy is experiencing something for the first time in his life, there is a sense of growing estrangement there as well, of becoming unfamiliar to each other. And so that's one thing that happens. Um, it's really important not to hold on to a need for familiarity, but to allow that estrangement to be informative and instructive. But another thing which we spoke about before is what does that mean in between the mother and the boy? And there is a received understanding at that phase that something radical is needed in order to not sexualize the relationship between the mother and the boy.
Thank you.
There are cultural practices for that in many cultures, including yours and mine, wherever we come from or who we come from. Some of us might be familiar with, like well, I won't name specific cultures, but separating the boys from the household so they go sleep with the men at that age. And the girls go sleep with the women. They sleep separately. I believe it's Lakota who, in some Lakota lineages, the boy was taught not to look the mother in the eyes after a certain age. I think until he got married. So there's a recognition of that sexual tension and a cultural way of handling it. You and I both have done work with mankind, and so we know in mankind what can show up in relation to this. It's not uncommon that men will speak at that age and the tension that comes into the household and the difficulties of that relationship with the mother at that age. And again, other men than the father show up and teach the boy about that. That helps the whole dynamic. Also shifting the boy from being needy of the mother to learn how to be respectful of the mother, but not her little boy. I mentioned Martin Shaw, and he says that anytime men gather, if they don't come out of it more in love and respectful of women, something is fundamentally wrong. And that's true of the initiation as well. It's not about at all distancing yourself from your mother. It's learning a different way of relating to her now that we become sexual beings.
Yeah, and I think what comes up when you mentioned the reiteration of the Iron John story around using the mother as a resource and not giving back, I think that's where that ties in for me. Yeah, because certainly in my own experience, I used my mother and the household she provided for us as a resource to just fuel me to go and wreak havoc in the world, really. Um, yeah, and I think because I wasn't initiated, in that way, it took me a long time to start to learn that level of respect, and I'm still learning that level of respect, and certainly in some of the acknowledgements that we've made for nature, and yeah, my growing appreciation for my daughters and my wife and my mother. Yeah, it helps me to turn that around.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Beautiful. So very soon, I am going to host you in this beautiful country on air for a webinar. And it's a webinar, I suppose it's a webinar similar to one that I've heard that was hosted by Ted Hargraves. And that's all the assumptions I'm going to make, and I'm going to let you speak for yourself. Tell us about what's coming up in this webinar, Miki.
Yeah, so the work I do is called Grassroots Rite of Passage, and this webinar is a 1 hour long presentation of, it's a eagle eye view of what that work entails. And briefly, it's supporting parents of boys in engaging community in a year-long rite of passage for the boy. It's everything we talked about today in different aspects of really remembering that we are not isolated units, and taking it upon ourselves during that year to parent in a specific way that recognizes not only the shifting needs of the boy, but the shifting needs of the family as well, so that we all change alongside each other. And it's a year of wondering about what does it mean to become a young man today in the place where we find ourselves. What's required? What's asked of us as parents? What's asked of us as community? What's asked of the boy? So the presentation is free, and it's my way of reaching parents who are curious about this, who have noticed the signs, who have that sense of urgency, and who've thought of rites of passage, who wanted to have something like that, and recognize that, gosh, now it's here much sooner than I'd expected. Kind of blindsided me. I don't know how to do this. I don't have the time. I don't know how to prepare. It feels like it's a bit too late. So the presentation is a way, whether or not they decide to work with me, it offers ways we might proceed at that stage.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. And I feel completely satisfied here that we somehow made our way back to this beautiful place after the chaos of me not recording what we spoke about before. And so I'm just going to offer the question for you. Is there anything more that you think or feel or want to say on the topic?
Well, we had one more false start before that one, and so I'm
We
not
did.
quite sure what I've said and what I haven't.
Say it all.
Yeah. Well, um, did did I talk about the specificity of time and place in the recorded?
No, that hasn't been recorded.
Right. So that's it's such an important part of this. Um, when you ask about the signs, for instance, that a mother might see, we speak of these terms: mother, son, signs, adolescence, and uh, it's tempting, and dare I say, slightly lazy of us as well to latch on to generic responses. We partly do that, I think, because of our cultural poverty. We're not raised in this. We weren't initiated. And so we're looking for someone who has the answers. Uh, my aim is really not to have the answers or to provide these are the signs and et cetera, et cetera. They're pointers, rather, suggestions, just like we mentioned about, when you asked about our practices here for initiating in Sweden, and we can find suggestions, but the work is really to bring it home. The work is really to say, okay, so these are possible signs. What am I actually seeing? This is a specific mother with a specific boy in a specific environment with their specific ancestry and history and relationship, right? So that's just like, you can take a permaculture principle but you apply it to where you live. And you chuck out 10 principles because they just don't make sense where you live. Or, like in Sweden, we don't need swales in Sweden because in most places here we have so much water. But in Australia, where it comes from, that's really relevant. But here it's not relevant to the same extent. So the same with this. There are a couple of principles, a couple of pointers, suggestions, but you got to mulch that into your own soil. You got to bring it home to your own community. And so much of this is wondering, like we're doing, the curiosity you apply to the teenagers you encounter, being open and porous to what you see, what you actually observe. This is, as I say, primary experience. There's the field guide to the pied flycatcher, and then there's the individual sitting on the wires outside my door. The field guide points, say, yeah, it's probably a flycatcher, but it's my relationship with that flycatcher that gives me an understanding of his or her life that's specific to this flycatcher in this place. So that's a really, really essential aspect of this. It's a time of wondering and engaging friends and family and saying, look, I see these signs. It suggests to me this. What are we to do? And so what I'm interested in is not how to create a successful young man who earns a huge amount of money and gets a lot of positions and flash cars. That might happen with anyone. What I'm interested in is how do we craft human beings in service to life? How do we craft young men who are fully alive, whose contribution is less measured than qualified, who have qualities that are truly, who have an eye for awe, mystery, and beauty, and an awareness and a softness and a strength that is engaging and enlivening. So that's where I'm coming from a lot with this, and that's the kind of wondering that I'm engaged with you here now, and with the people I work with. So that specificity, not only to place, but also to the times we find ourselves in. What is required of a young man these days to serve creation? What understanding does he have of the impact of endless growth? What do I want to convey to him about being a man? What is being a man? If we're not befuddled after having spent a lot of time in mankind, what a man is, then we haven't been paying attention, But that doesn't absolve us of the responsibility of wondering and passing something on, because there is a temptation to say, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah.
And to take that whole cultural poverty and just pass it on without any attempt at redemption onto the shoulders of the boy and saying, I don't know, you figure it out. So there's work to be done. But in the presentation that we'll share, I emphasize that it's not a program. It's just parenting. We will engage over that year anyway, but we can do it on autopilot, or we can do it with an awareness of where we find ourselves in time, in place, and in the life stage of our boy, and in the shifting roles and functions in the family as well. So I find that wildly exciting, full of possibility, and in the end, one of the most rich ways we can serve life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dame.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's amazing. Yeah, yeah, very grateful. Something that I've never done in this project, but I feel to start right now is to check out the way that we checked in. And after that, we can continue talking. But I want to check out. Super grateful for this connection and what is for me a unique perspective and rich perspective. Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Dame. Thank you for giving me a chance to articulate things I haven't thought about, you know, to in conversation and with the curiosity you bring to attempt to uh, respond in ways that surprise myself as well, you know. Uh, so I'm grateful for this time together and grateful uh, for you reaching out, for us having this connection and this time together, and for everyone who's listening as well.
Yeah, fantastic. We will share the Eventbrite link in the show notes once that happens. And you can register. As Miki said, it's a free webinar. I have been a part of one before. It's incredibly informative. As Miki said, even if you don't subscribe to the program, it is amazingly informative. So, yeah, jump on there and be a part of what is an interactive webinar with the opportunity for questions and answers at the end. Great. Thanks, Miki.
Thank you, Dame. See you there.